Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 25th of May, 2025, and there's just a couple of things I wanted to discuss today. Apologies for not getting any sort of content out to anybody over the last week or so. I've been planning some preps, which I'll tell you about in a minute. This is a discussion about the Trump and Putin peace talks at the beginning of the week, and I just want to highlight some of the points and concerns, with the whole show, really, because that's exactly what it is, just a show. As you know, I like to sort of, I like the dust and the madness to settle before jumping onto anything broadcasted by mainstream. I spend a bit of time comparing notes between some of the different news channels who, for the most part, are talking about the same thing with the same clicks and telling us all something that, we already know about. It's also, it allows me to try and make sense of and piece together what's actually happening, which can be difficult. But when doing so, you have to adopt the art of removing all of the foggy shit and just peeling back some of those layers. So I'm going to start with this little telephone chat between Trump and Putin on Monday. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything to come out of it. However, I have mentioned before that Trump approaches all negotiations, and he also says so in his sort of press conference afterwards, but all negotiations like their business deals. And I knew he'd be sort of schooled by the likes of Putin and also other, sort of leaders around the world that are not talking business. The reason for some of these conflicts that he's failing to understand, or maybe he does understand, it's just his approach. But the reasons and the root causes for some of these conflicts are rooted deep into history, and they're not on the surface of a piece of paper such as a business contract. So leaders and dictators, or whatever you want to call them, they're not messing around. And anyone with half a bit of sense would know this. We're talking about leaders that will do almost anything to fight their cause, and just to get what they want, regardless of the optics and the political delusions. So, what do you think? What do you think to this Trump and Putin chat? For me, pointless. But the political stage needs to be seen to be doing, at the very least, showing some kind of interest in peace. Now, here's my verdict. If we're going to look at this logically, without getting too involved, let's just see what both Trump and Putin said at their press conferences after the call with each other. But remember, guys, you should really only sort of be taking what they're saying with a pinch of salt, just for the most part. So just quickly, before we discuss this, and just to understand, right, peace talks or political efforts to find a resolution to a peace to a conflict. Sorry, it can occur before, during, and after a war. And in some cases, talks may sort of be initiated to prevent a war from breaking out in the first place, whilst in others, they may start during and after conflict to try and bring it to an end. I'm just going to throw up some slides, guys. I know this is not the best way to do it, but it's the way. It's the only way at the moment. Obviously, here, we're talking about talks during an ongoing war, with a focus on three things. So we just need to remember, guys, that we're looking at you know, the, the focus has to be to end hostilities. It has to be to negotiate terms of peace and to establish lasting peace. So the primary goal of peace talks during a war is to negotiate a ceasefire or truce that will bring to the end to the fighting, which of course is what's, I suppose, been happening as we speak, or well, that's what's happening now. There's a lot of talk and bluster about sort of ceasefires and peace talks. Negotiating terms of peace is the biggest hurdle all parties involved will have to successfully achieve, because we're talking about discussing issues such as territorial boundaries, political arrangement, economic compensation, the military deployments. And Putin has already made it clear on all of his negotiation terms, territorially, if that's a word. He wants, at the very least, to keep land already under Russian control and keep in Crimea. But if we're gonna be honest, and Putin has already sort of stated this. He wants the whole of the Ukraine to be under Russian rule, as well as other countries, starting with the Baltics. So there's Putin's territorial boundaries right there. But to establish lasting peace talks after a war aim to create sustainable and stable sort of peace, often through the implementation of agreements and institutions that will just help prevent those future conflicts. Just moving on. Anyway, earlier there's comments that have come out of Moscow, and when I say earlier this week. So actually, let's be honest with you, it was straight after the 2 hour call, shall we say. Both Putin and Trump came out with their views of the chat. Putin's words. I'm gonna just read them out to you exactly what he said. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there's a couple of points here. We need to take note of what these guys are saying. These world leaders are saying that potentially kicking off World War III. Putin says, indeed, this conversation took place and lasted for more than 2 hours. Now, I'm not sure what the emphasis is on this 2 hour thing, but I suppose, if the talks only last half hour, then that's a clear indication that there's a failure there. He says, I would like to note that it was very informative and very frank, and overall, in my opinion, very useful in this regard. First of all, I thanked the US president for the US support for the resumption of direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine regarding the possible conclusion of a peace treaty. Remember that word possible. The US president expressed his position regarding the cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, and I, for my part, this is Putin, also noted that Russia also supports a peace settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. He then goes on to say, we must simply determine the most effective paths towards peace. We agree with the US president that Russia will propose and is ready to work with the Ukrainian side on a memorandum regarding a possible future peace treaty, defining a number of positions, such as, for example, the principles of settlement, the timing of the possible peace agreement, and so on, including a possible ceasefire for a certain period of time if appropriate arrangements are reached. And as we know, these will be arrangements to be reached on Putin's terms. We already know that, okay? It's his terms or nobody's terms. So that being Ukraine to stop receiving Western aid. Well, that's not happening. Ukraine not to join NATO. Well, that process has already started. You won't hear about that in the press now, but that process has already started. Ukraine to demilitarize, and for the Ukraine to simply just roll over and give up. So, of course, regardless of what people want to think about Ukraine, Europe, with or without the US, they're having it. That's no consideration, or there's no consideration from the Russians for any of the Ukrainians' terms, such as how about giving us back the land that you've stolen and the thousands of Ukrainian children you've kidnapped, from our families and handed over to Russian foster parents. There will be no mention for the return of the occupied Crimea, and quite frankly, these will only be one-way transitional negotiations. Now, let's listen. So that's Putin. Okay, you can take anything, you can take whatever you want to from that, as you will. We'll discuss that in a minute. Let's just listen to Trump because it gets better. When asked about what is happening with the 30-day ceasefire, which I think was proposed by the US but at least a month ago, and Zelensky agreed upon, Trump states that after the Putin call, he spoke with European leaders, where Trump states, we have to get this thing resolved. 5,000 young people on average every single week dying in Ukraine. He then yaps on about the satellite pictures he's seen of the brutality, and no one, should want to be seeing these pictures. Honestly, he wants to get this thing resolved. Well, don't we all, to be honest with you? And this thing that he calls it, or he talks about, is called it's called a bloody war. Um, Not some fight in the playgrounds, between two lads at school. Do you know what I mean? So it, when you listen to him, it's kind of like he's got no concept. He's a businessman, and with that, he's got no concept of war and conflict. It's just crazy. But he goes on to talk about the 5,000 mainly military personnel dying in Ukraine every week. But we could compare that to, let's say, the 46,700 people that have died in Gaza over the last 470 days, of which 18,000 of those were children. And of course, another war or thing, or whatever you want to call it, being backed by the Americans. And I haven't. And I won't for this video. Listen, I'm not even going to get started on all of those other sort of deaths through other conflicts that the US are and have been sort of involved with or in over the recent times. So we're not going to talk about those conflicts. We're talking about Ukraine war. And then just to finish off, so not just to finish off what Trump was saying, Trump continues with the same bullshit he's been yapping on about for at least a year or so. He says, "This is not my war, and this is a war that would never have started if I was president." He's got to stop saying this because, saying that it's not your war sends a very unclear message to your allies. And he hasn't, or he wasn't, shall we say, the president when this started. So that's irrelevant also. And I bet this war would have started no matter whose watch it was on, because Donald Trump, this is not a business deal. It's a war. And he needs to get this principle into his thick head. I'm sure he's already got it. It's already there. He knows what he's doing. Right. Let's move on before we go down another rabbit hole. He states that he spends, or he, as in the Americans, I like the way they say he, the Americans have spent hundreds of billions on this war, but fails to state the minerals deal just signed, which will allow the US obviously to claw that back. Now, this next piece should get your attention. Just listen to this. When asked if he thinks anything is going to come off of the back of the phone call with Putin, he says this: "I think something is going to happen," whatever that means, and then states that there are some very big egos involved, but thinks something is going to happen. Quickly followed by, "If nothing happens, then he's just going to back away, and they'll have to just keep going." And he also states again, this was a European situation. It should have remained a European situation, and goes on again about how the US got more involved than the Europeans financially. And this is true because there is one thing that, or there's one good thing that has come out of this, and that is all other NATO sort of member states or countries are finally committing to spending a lot more than they have been on defence and military. So to be honest, though, other member states are sort of only pulling their fingers out because Russia is advancing west. So again, it's all about the money. Trump states that the 4-day trip in the Middle East last week or this week, was it beginning of this week, whenever it was, that he earns in the terms of deals over there in the Middle East over the 4 days was the same amount. So the deals that he's struck and signed off, the value of those deals is the same amount of money the US have spent on the Ukraine war over the last 3 years. So not only are there 4-day deals being made to the tune of trillions, but mineral deals made with Ukraine, allowing them to, in some way, sort of financially contribute to the war they never started nor wanted. So, it's all about the money. This bit worries me a little. He believes something is going to happen. There are very big egos involved, which means Putin, Zelensky, and the Europeans are, actually, in my view, taking this war seriously and know, what this means to their countries and their population. So Trump is only used to talking to board members and CEOs, but then saying, that he's going to back away and say that this is a European problem and should have remained that way. So where the fuck does the NATO alliance come into all of this? I don't understand. I don't. Anyway, that's me. I don't understand what some of these people are saying, and these are people that massive, massive influences. Anyway, is he saying that the Europeans started this or triggered Putin to invade Ukraine, or of course not, because this is all Putin's doing. Is he saying that if and when the shit hits the fan, the US aren't getting involved? Of course not. What he's saying, and you should take note of this, that the US are ready to walk away from these brokered negotiations because all parties, excluding Trump, are coming to terms that a war is upon us. So, concluding that Putin isn't going to stop the war in Ukraine, and why? The whole of Europe are sort of coming to terms that their lives could be on the verge of being flipped upside down. Now, the only people that don't seem to be seeing what is sort of happening here is Trump. But then I'm not buying that either. And this is why, we have to be very vigilant and analytic when picking up some of this bullshit on mainstream because it's just all bluster. They're all preaching, from the same hymn sheet, to be honest. We're all being led down the garden path. Governments around the world know exactly where and what they're all up to. They all know, if war's coming, and you and I will unfortunately be the last to know about it. I did notice actually when I was watching, I think it was Trump's address. So when when he gave his address, there's one thing I did notice actually, and I noticed in his face how tired he started to look already, albeit the man is 78 years old, but bouncing around the world, causing absolute chaos, completely shaking up the global markets. With the US debt ticker still going up, it can't be good for his health. Having, the weight of a possible World War III on your shoulders whilst trying to rebuild the US and making sure, those terrorist states do not end up in possession of nukes, whilst looking over your shoulder and waiting for the Chinese to strike, all at the age of 78. So there's no wonder he's just wants, I suppose he just wants everything to be resolved like a business deal and playing golf because it's easier. But unfortunately for him, this is an introduction to the real politics, I guess. He's met his match in the boardroom. He's been too used to, I think he's been too used to calling all of the shots, calling all the bluffs, and getting his own way, using whatever bullying tactics he and the rest of the corporate world have been used to using. So for Trump to have been, I suppose, this is only my view, guys, but for Trump to have been in the office the first time was one thing, but twice. Personally, I think he needs to stick to a business, and he's even getting a little bit too old for that now. So let's move on before we start upsetting some Trump supporters, guys. The two sides that being sort of Putin and Zelensky couldn't be any further apart. Putin's quest is on a much larger scale than people are led to believe. And when I say that, governments, intelligence, and militaries are well aware. It's you and I that aren't. But instead of going on about that, let's just look at those optics quickly. Ukraine are never going to accept the loss for the second time now in 10 years, regardless of winning or losing the war. They're defending their country, their sovereignty, families, businesses, and lives. The EU and NATO are definitely not going to allow it to sort of happen because it's a direct threat to the alliance, first and foremost. When Trump talks about this, he doesn't even talk about NATO. I don't even think he's interested. I bet he doesn't even know what it means. But let's move on. But just as importantly, the West cannot be allowed to sit back and watch countries invade their neighbors and just get away with it. Because what kind of message does that send the rest of the world? It's good to see that politicians are going through the rule book and being seen to be going through the motions. As long as the word peace is in the headlines, that's all that matters. So, ladies and gents, peace is inevitable. That is a fact because wars and conflicts they do come to an end at some point. And because that's a given, we're only interested in when that's going to happen. And sadly, many things that can and will happen on that journey to peace, we're going to have to sort of endure. So more times than not, wars have to happen to be in a position for peace. As sort of stated in, I think it was my last video. I think it was wars and conflicts are a part of life, and no one on the face of this planet can change that. So, people need to kind of get that into their heads, really. We need to understand what they're about. But before that, we need to accept that war does, and will happen. There will be deaths, both military, civilians, guilty and innocent. There are always casualties of war, including innocent civilians. I've come to the conclusion over the last few weeks, most populations reside to the idea that because wars are not being sort of experienced in their country, then they simply aren't happening. Of course, they're happening, but people choose to ignore it because why should that even be bothering them? If it's not happening anywhere near them, then that's it. It's easy to forget. It's not impacting them and their families. Um, you know, there's not many individuals alive today, sadly, that served in World War II. So it's a topic of conversation we don't find ourselves having in social groups, pubs, work, or such like, or wherever. And with that, it's easily forgotten about. But unfortunately for us, adopting this mindset, we simply become ignorant, and over long periods of time, many people become normalized and are therefore normality biased, meaning we simply won't believe that anything bad is going to be happening to us, because it if it did, it would have been, or if it does, let's say for instance, it will be out of the norm. It will be not normal, um, depending on whereabouts in the world you live, obviously. So for the Ukrainians, normal life is the houses being wiped out and losing family members and going to funerals every week and all the rest of it. See, we as humans are like, I mean, we're like this with the simplest of matters. So, cancer. Many go through life thinking they're not going to get cancer because they don't know anyone who has it, and therefore it's not normal for them. And this applies to all of those dreadful illnesses, individuals and families that have to sort of go through on a daily basis. But we accept the fact that when walking down the street, let's say with our children, a vehicle isn't going to be mounting the curb and killing them and other people on that path. And why? Well, because not only have we not experienced it, but have never seen it happen in our lives. I talked about fighting on my last video, and now, or not now, but how people, um, I'm just trying to remember what I said. I think it's how people have never, like, listen, there's a lot of people out there that have never had a fight or not had one for many years because it isn't a normal occurrence in their lives. And to sort of understand conflict and, to understand war, to understand, sort of human beings being blown to pieces on the battlefield and understand shells landing on your home and wiping your families out and understanding what it's like to have no power, at your home for weeks, have no job or support system, and not being able to put food on the table and simply go without are, for many of us, it's not normal. So, it's easy to it's easy to not accept it. Anyway, we're going to finish this off. Um, what is it like to go to the supermarkets in your area to find either all of the shelves are empty and as a result the stores are closed or closing? Just a simple question for all of you, actually. If you have an well, let's say you have an electricity power outage which affects the supply of water to your home and the surrounding area, and you go to the supermarkets to find that the shelves are empty, certainly in the bottled water aisle, then do you? as an individual or family unit or whatever, a group, do you have a plan on what to do from that point onwards? See, I'll use those two examples because we're seeing signs of this happening more often than we should be at the moment, with the substation incidents sort of happening at the moment and on a monthly basis. This exact scenario should be the first incident you guys should be sort of basing your plans on, or your plans against. Certainly, if you're living in Europe, unfortunately for millions of people out there, they simply they don't believe any of this is going to happen in their lifetime. But if they're going to be truthful to themselves, they'll admit that, maybe it's already happening. Although you read about it, people talk about it, you see it on the news or whatever about the blackouts and that, there's still in the back of their mind the defense mechanism comes in, and the shutters come down. So, don't pretend it isn't or hasn't sort of started. That's all I'm kind of saying. The signs are there, guys. I just, I want nothing more than for all of this bloodshed to stop. I'm going to be honest with you. The wars and conflicts around the world that have started or starting, I think, have impacted us as a family unit here. And when I say that, I mean financially. Okay, because we're not seeing conflict here on our streets, but financially, whether that be because it's the cost of living, a recession, or whatever you want to call it, off of the back of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine impacting, the economies around the world, whether that be the lack of jobs available out there or people going out of business because of trade wars and economic downturns. I'm just saying that we, as a family unit, are being impacted financially, and that's before we even look at hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, and so on. So, just to finish, thankfully for you guys, as I finish off, I know that I'm still trying to work out how to not kind of what I'm saying, but how to. It's the content that I'm putting on the screen. I'm just trying to work out the best way to do that. Let's put that aside. That's not what we're talking about. My mindset has changed. Um, it's the concept. My concept has changed. As long as we, as a family unit, have water and food, then that's all that matters to me. I urge you all to do the same. Your primary prep has to be water. That goes without saying. So just put yourself into the scenario whereby there's no water coming out of your taps and no bottled water in the stores. Prepare for that first. That'll be water filtration, purification, collection, storage, and all the rest of it. Right, enough of that. I wanted to sort of mention the Trump and the Putin call. I knew it would be a load of bullshit, but no point in having the channel if we can't sort of discuss those potential life-changing events. I'm going to close it off now, guys. Just get yourselves military fit or just fit. Get yourselves infantry aware or just at least preparedness savvy. And more importantly, keep an ear to the ground, and just just keep on top of what's happening.